You know, it's not often that I come across a game that's purely the result of throwing shit together. Shadwen is exactly that. Developed and published by Frozen Byte in May of 2016, Shadwen seems to be their first title that takes advantage of a fully explorable 3D environment. This is important to point out now since their other titles up to this release could only be played on the 2D plane. Despite what the Steam page says, Shadwen is a puzzle game with stealth elements that is no joke, just a big escort quest. So the premise of the game begins with our protagonist Shadwen assassinating the king and ending the game. If only life were that easy. After this scene, we go back in time to play through a tutorial of both characters before we get a cutscene of how these two are connected. To make it simple, Shadwen is out to kill the king and Lily is just tagging along to serve as the player's only way to progress. I'll explain a bit more on that when we come to it, and that's basically it. I know I gave a messy description, but this is literally how the game starts off, and if this isn't an omen for what's coming, I don't know what is. When it comes to the game's visuals, everything's just on par, I guess. Nothing's horribly ugly, dark, or unreadable, but it is boring, which is kind of weird to say considering this is the team who made the Trine series, which is full of beautiful, colorful scenes to play in. This, however, is just plain. It's not even dark fantasy, it's just like medieval times, I guess, which is fine, but it's just kind of weird if you're familiar with the other titles. Thankfully, the sound design hits the mark pretty well.
Hear that? I heard something as well.
Everything really just kind of sounds like you'd expect it to, with nothing to stand out. I can appreciate that in a title that's more grounded in reality. My main issue though is that sometimes the sounds get drowned out by the music. It's nothing too distracting, but you will notice it. The music here is good, but after a while you'll notice something.
What is this everything? It was nothing.
Yep, all the intense music is the same. As for the ambient tracks though, those serve their purpose. Again, nothing terrible, but nothing great either. Looking back through the footage, I hardly found any levels that really stood out. All of the environments are too similar looking to really give you a sense of where you are. Towards the end of the game, you can tell you're in a castle, but that's really the only environment where you can feel a difference. This kind of goes back to the graphical direction of the game as a whole. If this had more fantasy tropes and really took advantage of a wide color palette, this game wouldn't have felt so monotonous. I finished this title in one sitting, and to be honest with you, it felt like I was in the same general area every time I went into a level. Now there are slight differences here and there, but everything's just so goddamn similar you really can't tell. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of the gameplay loop, I gotta point out a specific mechanic that really just hinders the entire experience. Shadwen has time manipulation similar to that of Superhot, meaning that time only moves forward when you do. This is supposed to allow you time to take in more of your surroundings and give you time to think. What it actually does is cause irritation and frustration. In my head, whenever a game stops, my brain automatically assumes the game is hanging up on something or that there's something wrong. With the time manipulation being a core mechanic, I had this feeling the entire way through. And call me crazy, but I think they just did this to avoid putting in a checkpoint system, I think. Or maybe to allow people to find that absolute perfect run, because when you get caught, it's straight up game over and you can rewind time as far back as you want, even all the way to the beginning of the level. It's something, I guess. I'm honestly just confused as to why it's in here. The game does give you an option of moving time forward by holding down a button, and I wouldn't be surprised if some people just taped it down. I wouldn't blame them either, because time stopping just because you're not moving is more annoying than it is useful. As for the rest of the gameplay, it's pretty simple. The goal of each level is to guide Lily from one end of a level to another, manipulating objects to create distractions so she can sneak by the guards undetected, and that's the entire game. Thankfully, the guards will never notice Lily and she can just walk right in front of them and it won't result in a game over. Be prepared to do this for every single level of the game. I wasn't joking when I said the whole thing is a huge escort quest. Shadwen has several tools she can craft to distract or outright kill guards along the way. Her primary tool is a rope dart that she can use to get onto platforms and to pull objects over to create distractions. I'm not going to go through all of her tools since I hardly ever use them. My review playthrough consisted of as few kills as possible, but my main goal was for Lily not to see any of the bodies. Whenever I did have to kill a guard, I would just stuff them into some hay and they'd never be seen again. So the only non-lethal tool I used was a decoy toy, which does exactly what you'd expect. The only limit to these is that you have to find the parts to craft them in these chests located throughout the game, and you don't have an unlimited supply of them. Surprisingly, there are post-game missions in the game where Shadwen and Lily can escape the castle. I ran through these and they're nothing special, just more of the same really. You can also start a new game and challenge yourself by going on a kill 'em all run or a pacifist run, but I don't see many people giving the game a second go around. It's really a one and done. Thankfully, the experience only lasts 5 hours, but at times it can be a painful 5 hours. The monotony alone makes it a slog at times, and that's not even including some of the frustration you'll run into. Speaking of frustration, sometimes Lily won't advance when she has clear opportunities to do so. Thankfully, this didn't happen all too often during my playthrough, but I'm sure some people have quit entirely over her messy AI, which sometimes works in your favor when it spots an opening in a patrol pattern and just runs through half of the level without you even doing anything. Much like our last review, there's no story. The closest thing you get are some character development moments with the two main characters getting to know each other. Depending on how often you let Lily see a dead body, it changes her perception of Shadwen as the game goes on. This being a game that came out in 2016, it's honestly no surprise that they included a story in which dialogue changes depending on your actions. The mistake here is that they really thought it was worth a second go around. Normally I would tell you to skip ahead to avoid spoilers, but believe it or not, the only two cutscenes at the beginning of the game are the only ones that exist in the game. Quite literally, everything else that happens story-wise is done at this screen. There are alternate endings, but honestly, they're not worth talking about. I genuinely apologize for being so bare bones with this review. I like to go more in depth where I can, when I can. But with this, everything's so surface level and nothing really needs to be elaborated on. I've covered stealth titles on this channel that have either come out way before Shadwen did and outperformed it on all fronts, or I've covered titles that have came out more recently and had a vision and honed in on it. This is honestly a mess through and through, and if you've played their other titles, you can plainly see what went wrong here. I'm going to go off script a bit here. What I think went wrong with the development of this game is that the developers were so scared of stepping out of their comfort zone. If you've played the Trine series, then you know it's a physics-based puzzle game. That's all it is. And then if you look at Shadwen, it's still a physics-based puzzle game with just maybe one or two stealth elements thrown into it with some extra tools. I think they've just had a hard time breaking out of their mold, and I've kind of mentioned this jokingly in a previous review. If you remember the Of Orcs and Men review, I kind of harped on Cyanide Studios for only making pro cycling managers every year. And so what happens is I think the studio gets stuck in this loop where they only want to make one game because they know it'll keep them afloat. And then you have a studio like Frozen Byte who stepped out of the box, but not entirely out of the box because the game's still the same as a physics-based puzzle game. That's all Shadwen is. Even looking at their Steam page now, they've still defaulted back to Trine. They do have an early access title out and about, but it's not doing too hot reviews-wise. So, I mean, I think this was just a title that was doomed to fail. Anyway, let's get back to the script. Is Shadwen a good game? I mean, come on. Like, that's not even a rhetorical question. I can't remember if I bought this from a holiday sale or got it from a Humble Bundle, but I'm genuinely pissed that I spent money on this somehow. The title wasn't even good by 2016 standards, so I know I'm not missing something here. I'm kind of in awe that they're selling this at a weird but kind of high price for what it is. It's definitely not worth the money. Should you give it a try? No, just stay away from it. There's not a single redeeming quality to this title and not a single selling point either. After the third or maybe fourth level, you've essentially played the entire game. Shadwen feels more like a college kid's project that barely passes a video game than it does an actual game. It feels more experimental than it does an actual finished product, even from an indie studio. Too much of the studio's previous work can be seen here, and it's obvious that they didn't want to step too far out of their comfort zone.